The tragic fate of Janice Drake in 1959 is one of the darker stories from America's violent underworld of the mid-20th century. Once a beauty queen and a woman often seen in glamorous circles, her life ended in a Cadillac, alongside mobster Little Augie Pisano, shot execution style with a bullet to the back of the head. The photograph captures the grim aftermath, her lifeless body slumped on the front seat, while a police officer leans in with a flashlight, studying the bloody scene as curious onlookers gather in the background. Drake's death was shocking, not only because of its brutality, but also because it symbolized how deeply the Mafia had entangled itself with everyday society. She had once been known in the press for her connections to celebrities, entertainers, and even politicians. Yet her repeated associations with underworld figures placed her in the crosshairs of danger. On that fateful night in 1959, she happened to be in the wrong car, with the wrong man, at the wrong time. The car itself becomes a character in the story. The Cadillac, a symbol of status and power, turned into a coffin on wheels. The steering wheel, the leather seats, the polished chrome, all details of mid-century American luxury, are stained with the violence of organized crime. The flashlight beam of the policeman in the photo suggests a desperate search for answers, for some trace of the shooters who left their victims to bleed in the darkness. Her killing, along with Pisano's, was widely believed to be part of a mob retaliation, another episode in the endless cycle of vendettas, power struggles, and betrayals that defined the American Mafia of the 1950s. For the public, however, Janice Drake's death resonated differently. She was not a hardened gangster, but a socialite caught between two worlds, the glitter of fame and the shadows of crime. The photograph endures as more than just crime scene evidence. It speaks to the fragility of glamour, the peril of proximity to power, and the tragic cost of living too close to the orbit of the mob. In Drake's tragic final pose, caught forever in the camera's flash, history preserves both a cautionary tale and a chilling reminder of how the Mafia's violence extended far beyond its own ranks.
This photograph captures a crime scene investigation in Chicago in 1925 during the turbulent years of Prohibition. 3 police officers are seen examining the interior of what appears to be a restaurant or cafe. The atmosphere in the picture is tense as the officers carefully study the environment where a man was reportedly shot by associates of the notorious gangster Al Capone. The first detail that draws attention is the overturned chair lying in the middle of the floor. It suggests a sudden struggle or violent moment, perhaps when the victim attempted to resist or was surprised by his attackers. The dark stains on the ground, most likely blood, reinforce the brutality of the event. Near the chair, we notice a small table covered with a cloth, also stained, adding to the impression of chaos and violence. One officer, standing on the left, appears to be putting on or removing gloves, preparing to handle evidence carefully. His posture and attention show the seriousness with which investigators approached crime scenes, even at that time. Another officer, in the center, is looking out of the window, perhaps searching for possible witnesses or clues outside, as though the story of the crime might extend beyond the room itself. A third officer, near the piano, seems to be pointing towards something, emphasizing a detail to his colleagues. The piano itself is a striking element. It shows that this space was once lively, possibly filled with music and social gatherings, but now it has become the site of bloodshed. The historical context adds even more meaning to this photograph. Chicago in the 1920s was famous not only for jazz, speakeasies, and rapid urban growth, but also for organized crime. Prohibition created a massive illegal market for alcohol, and figures like Al Capone built empires on bootlegging, bribery, and violence. Gang wars between rival groups were common, and shootings in restaurants, bars, or on the streets became almost routine. This image is not just a picture of police work. It is a window into a society where law enforcement was constantly challenged by powerful criminal networks. At the same time, the photograph reveals the human dimension of crime. It shows the aftermath, the silence that follows violence, the officials forced to piece together what happened, and the traces left behind: overturned furniture, spilled blood, broken order. It is a stark reminder that behind the headlines and stories of gangsters, there were real human tragedies, real lives destroyed. Thus, this photo is more than a historical document. It is a testimony of how violence and crime shaped everyday life in Chicago, and how the authorities struggled to impose order in an age dominated by prohibition, corruption, and gang warfare.
This photograph, taken in 1969, captures one of the most dramatic and haunting moments in the long history of organized crime trials. In the image, we see a witness seated at a table with a microphone, yet his entire face and head are hidden under a heavy cloth hood. Only his hands, resting tensely on the desk, are visible. The reason for such secrecy is clear. The man is testifying against the Mafia, and revealing his identity could mean a death sentence. The image conveys fear and vulnerability, but also a certain kind of courage. By speaking out, this witness risks his life, even while hidden. The microphone in front of him becomes a symbol. It is his voice, not his face, that carries weight. In a world where silence often meant survival, his words were weapons against an organization that thrived on intimidation, loyalty, and violence. The black and white tones of the photograph make the scene even more powerful. The hood, heavy and shapeless, strips the man of individuality. He becomes anonymous, a faceless representative of countless people who lived under the shadow of the Mafia. The picture suggests that this is not just one man's story, but a larger struggle between ordinary citizens and a powerful criminal network. In 1969, testifying against the Mafia was a rare and dangerous act. The mob had a strict code of silence known as omerta. Breaking it was considered the ultimate betrayal, and informants were often hunted down and killed. For this reason, law enforcement sometimes used extreme measures to protect witnesses, such as disguising them during court hearings. This particular moment symbolizes both the strength of the Mafia's power and the growing determination of authorities and individuals to challenge it. Beyond its historical context, the photograph speaks universally about justice and fear. It shows the human cost of fighting crime, the need to hide one's face, the constant threat of reprisal, and the tension between the fear of death and the hope for truth. Even though the witness is hidden, the image reveals his humanity through posture and gesture, the bowed head, the clenched hands, the weight of the decision to speak out. This haunting scene reminds us that justice often comes at a price. The hood may conceal the man's face, but it cannot silence the message he brings. That even in the darkest times, there are people willing to speak the truth, no matter the risk. This striking photograph from March 30th, 1945, captures an unusual scene in New York City. Police Commissioner William O'Brien personally smashing illegal pinball machines with a sledgehammer in Brooklyn. At first glance, the act may seem excessive, even theatrical, but it reflects a fascinating chapter in American history, when pinball was not seen as harmless entertainment, but as a form of gambling closely tied to organized crime. In the picture, O'Brien, wearing a dark overcoat and fedora, is caught mid-swing as he drives the hammer into the glass and mechanics of a pinball cabinet. Around him, several men look on. Some are officials assisting in the crackdown, while others appear to be bystanders, silently observing the destruction of machines that, until recently, were a source of both amusement and illicit profit. The forceful gesture captured by the camera is symbolic, a demonstration of state power, a message that illegal gambling devices would no longer be tolerated. The historical context is essential. For decades, pinball was outlawed in cities like New York and Los Angeles, not because of concerns about children wasting time, but because pinball was essentially a game of chance before the introduction of flippers in the late 1940s. Players inserted coins, hoping that balls would land in certain spots, earning them free games or prizes. To authorities, this was no different than slot machines. As a result, pinball parlors often operated in the shadows, protected by bribes, and linked to criminal rackets. The destruction of these machines was part of a broader moral and legal campaign against gambling and vice. By smashing them in public, O'Brien was not only enforcing the law, but also staging a spectacle for newspapers and the public. The photograph immortalizes that performance, the commissioner, hammer in hand, embodying the state's fight against vice, while the broken glass and shattered wood of the machine serve as evidence of victory. Yet the irony is clear in hindsight. Pinball, once demonized as a tool of corruption and crime, would later be embraced as a mainstream pastime, appearing in arcades, diners, and basements across America by the 1970s. What was once contraband became nostalgia. This image, therefore, is a reminder of how society's views on leisure, risk, and morality evolve over time. More than just a snapshot of law enforcement, the picture symbolizes the tension between authority and popular culture, between official morality and the games people love to play. In O'Brien's determined swing, we see both the seriousness of the crackdown and the absurdity of treating pinball as a dangerous threat.
James Whitey Bulger was one of the most notorious crime bosses in American history, his name forever tied to the dark underworld of Boston. He earned his nickname, Whitey, because of his pale blonde hair, though he hated it, preferring instead to be feared and respected by his peers. Born in Boston in 1929, Bulger was a restless and troublesome youth. By the age of 14, he had already been arrested for delinquency, and his teenage years were marked by repeated escapes from home and brushes with the law. For a time, he even ran off with a traveling circus, a foreshadowing of the chaotic life that awaited him. By the 1970s, he had fully immersed himself in Boston's criminal underworld. Bulger's rise was complicated. On one hand, he worked with the Patriarca crime family, a dominant Mafia clan in New England. On the other hand, he secretly provided information to the FBI, feeding them intelligence about the Mafia's activities. This unholy alliance gave Bulger a kind of protection. While law enforcement cracked down on other gangsters, he was able to expand his own power, building a network of extortion, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Eventually, his double life caught up with him. When his role as an informant began to attract too much attention, Bulger fled Boston. For 16 years, he lived as a fugitive, making the FBI's most wanted list and becoming almost a ghost figure. Rumored sightings stretched from Europe to California. During that time, his legend grew. As much for his brutality, he was tied to at least 19 murders, as for his ability to elude capture. In 2011, Bulger's run finally ended. He was arrested in Santa Monica, California, where he had been living quietly with his longtime girlfriend. Brought back to Boston, he faced charges of murder, racketeering, extortion, and drug trafficking. After a high-profile trial lasting 2 months, Bolger was found guilty and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 5 years. For many in Boston, his conviction was a long-awaited moment of justice, the fall of a man who had terrorized the city for decades. But even in prison, Bolger's story did not end quietly. In 2018, at the age of 89, he was brutally murdered by fellow inmates in West Virginia, a violent end befitting a violent life. His story continues to fascinate, a tale of crime, betrayal, and the thin line between law enforcement and the underworld.